Welcome, everybody. This is a humorous history podcast, and we are the Goofy Historians. Today, we're going to do a random year in history. As always, we're not real historians, but we hope this is mostly true and somewhat funny. If you enjoy it at all, please remember to hit subscribe. And our motto is truth when necessary, but humor at all costs. So our random year in history is going to be, let me give it a good stir here. Ready? Oh, look, one's caught on the stir. Let's check it out. What do we got here? Okay, we got the year, and this could be anywhere in the world. It can be a plus or minus 5 or 10 years or whatever. But we should try to do something to honor Black History Month. Okay, the year is 1850. And I just wanted to say something real quick about Black History Month, if you don't mind. And then we can talk about something to do with Black history. But I don't know. Why is Black History Month only 1 month? And in February, like it's in the middle of the winter, right? That's the winter sports is the only sports that Black people don't dominate. That was a joke. But seriously, it should be in May or June or something. And really, if you think about it, American history, Black history is American history. There's no difference. And we could talk about all the characters, Martin Luther King. But let's talk about what's going on now. They dominate every sport. My favorite people on the planet right now are, I could just name a few. Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, Academy Award winner Jamie Foxx. And let's not forget music. For the love of God, Elvis with his shaking leg, he clearly appropriated that from Black musicians and gave them no credit for it and invented rock and roll. So we'll honor Black history, but American history is Black History Month. So what are we going to do for this year, 1850? It was in the middle of the Civil War.
No, well, the Civil War was over by then. But we'll get plus or minus. I mean, at that point, they were into Reconstruction. But let's go to 1846. Let's go to 1846.
1864? 1846.
1846.
Okay.
I mean, no. What
1864 is the Civil War.
1864. 1864, right? It started 1861, 1864 was the Civil War was coming to an end. It was at that point, the Civil War was going to be won by the North, but how much longer it was going to go on was a question, because they still had Lee. Robert E. Lee was still an amazing general, and he was holding out with little resources they had left.
So just to be clear for our people in non-U.S., Robert E. Lee was the head general dude of the South, of the Confederates.
Right. And at this point, he's fighting
Grant.
So Grant was in the East, and now he's fighting in the West. This is the first time, like, the two major generals of the war are actually facing each other.
Woohoo!
And so Grant's the head of the whole thing by this point. But they're all the way up to, so the capital of the North was Richmond, and Richmond was supplied by Petersburg, a little city outside Petersburg. So what we want to talk about is one of the most tragic and idiotic battles in maybe not just US history, but world history, where really good ideas went really, really astray, all because of bad management. and it didn't need to happen, right?
And this is called the
So
what?
the Battle of the Crater.
The Battle
The
of the
Battle of the Crater.
Crater. I remember
So
this
at this
tale.
point,
Yeah,
yeah. So at this point, the battle is there's a siege going on. It's actually devolved into siege warfare, something you wouldn't see again until World War I, where people were living in ditches,
trenches.
right?
Yeah.
Trenches, yeah, it was trench warfare, right? As opposed to the beginning of the war where everybody was marching around. They didn't realize that they could shoot a gun now 600 feet, right? So you can't just get up and march. You're in trenches now. So both sides had trenched in around Petersburg, which was supplying Richmond. And it was going to be a long siege. And Lee actually knew. He said, if it ever comes to a point where we're under siege, we're going to lose, right? So Lee knew that time was running out on him, right? But he was holding up. So Grant knows he has to win. So Grant was ahead of the whole thing, but below him was Meade, who had just won Gettysburg. And under him was this guy called Burnside, who had just lost a major battle in Fredericksburg. And Meade, even though he had won Gettysburg, his mistake was he never followed up, right? So he won the Battle of Gettysburg, and then he just let everything go, right? He let Lee escape.
You know
So
what?
the war
These
could have been
guys.
ended there, and now there's.
Can I chime in real quick? Okay, these three white guys,
Sure.
from what I remember the story as, these three white guys were the epitome of incompetence. They were like the same white guys that were in charge of the Light Brigade. I don't even know if we should name them.
Not except for
Meade.
Grant.
I
Grant
know,
was actually
but
one.
no, but I'm talking
Yeah,
about the
but
guys on
below
the
him,
ground. Meade, Burnside, and the drunk other coward general. Those three guys, we shouldn't even say their names. We just call them the racist, the sideburns guy, and the drunk general because
he wasn't even a general. He was like a colonel or something, right?
those three
So
guys were awful, and they cost a lot of people lives and made the war continue for like another year.
another 8 months at least. Yeah.
But anyway, let's get to the big bomb.
So yeah, that's the point. It's like when I was young, when I was young starting my career, I thought, well, I'm a good engineer, a good mathematician. I really don't care who's my boss, right? Because it doesn't matter, right? I can do the job. Just leave me alone, right? But when you're working for years, you realize how important it is to have a good boss, because a bad boss can just ruin your career, right? It can just ruin it. So this is a case of perfect of that, where you have really, really good people on the front, literally on the front, right? And they have good direct supervision at them, but above them, you have complete incompetence. It's like Dilbert almost. Remember the comic book Dilbert? It's like that. You have Dilbert bosses all the way up to Grant, and Grant's too far removed. So what the whole battle is, they're in the trenches and they're sitting there, and this one group of soldiers on the front, on the north, right? They actually come from Pennsylvania, and they're miners. They've been
That's right. They're
miners all their
miners.
life.
They
They're
want to
miners,
dig a hole.
right? Coal miners, right? They've been mining all their life. And their immediate supervisor is an actual mining engineer, right? So they have nothing to do. They're like trenching around, right? That's their job, is to just be in the trenches, right? And they're just looking over and says, well, all we need to do, right, is dig a tunnel. Starting here, dig a tunnel under right where the South's main entrenchment is. Put some explosives under there and blow the shit out of it, and then we'll all just follow through, and we'll go straight to Pittsburgh, and then Richmond will follow, be the end of the war.
Okay, stop for a second. Okay, so that's the idea. The idea is to dig a tunnel, put the explosives in there, and blow it up. That's the same strategy that was used 1,000 times during the 16th century to take down a castle wall. And now we're using it in 1864. Okay, that's great. Go ahead. I just wanted to point that out.
But it's a little Yeah, it's
but
a little different because now
it
we have
wasn't a wall.
projectiles, right?
It was a trench, but still,
It was an entrenchment. It wasn't a wall, and they had barreled rifles that could pick you off if you get close, right? That's why they're in trenches, right? They're not doing trebuchets anymore. They're like a little. They have cannons and they have rifles that can shoot you at 600 to 1,000 feet with a sharpshooter, right? So these people they're hiding in trenches, right? There's no way you're going to go over the top and win. But if they could like build this 600, they're gonna have to go 600 feet from their trench to that trench, and no one's ever done 600 feet in the Middle Ages. They could get up right to the wall and build a trench and try to take down a castle wall. So this is different, right?
Yeah.
But the concept is the same, right? They have to dig, you have to become moles, right? So they take it to Burnside, who's
they call him, and his Burnside.
Right.
They actually named sideburns after this guy because he had really thick sideburns. Burnside.
Yeah, and he's big and he's goofy and he's fat.
But he's not a racist like his commanding officer.
Thinks, okay, yeah, it's fine. You know, guys, you have nothing else to do. You're just sitting there trenching, right? Might as well dig something. Who cares, right? But he brings it to Meade, and Meade says, well, that's just ridiculous. No one can build a mine 600 feet. You're going to run out of air, right? You're going to get asphyxiated down there. And his engineer says it can't be done, but he takes it to Grant, and Grant goes, well, it's probably not going to work, but what harm could it do, right? Get these people, you know. So it goes back down from Grant to Burnside to Meade to their boss, and they says, okay, start. And so it's called Colonel Pleasant is the engineer, right? He goes, well, what we're going to need, we're going to need barrels, we're going to need shovels, you know, we're going to need all this stuff. We're going to.
You don't get any of that.
I go, well, no, we're not going to give you any of that. Just dig.
Dig with your hands.
So without any supplies, these engineers these miners from Pennsylvania actually do with little apple crates, boxes, right? They dig it out by, you know, their own little trenching shovels, and little by little. And Meade, Pleasant actually figures out this really ingenious ventilation system where they had these pipes going in. There's a flame on the other side where it would suck out the bad air and the good air would come in, right? And so they actually do it, right? They dig a mine 600 feet, right, under the earth, and get through all these obstacles of clays and rocks and cave. And so in order to put up the roof of the mine, right, they had to like go get a bridge that had got like blown up and get little pieces of wood and build this thing. And there's pictures of it. It's a really nice little mine going in there. And they said, well, we need like 300 foot, you know, fuse, right? Waterproof fuse. And they go, well, we just can give you little blasting fuses of like 5 feet each. So they have to take these 5 feet fuses and sort of splice them together, right? Which are not waterproof. Yeah. And they get it all the way there. But the point is, the most important part of the story is that actually this is Burnside's idea. His white troops are just exhausted from fighting for the last 4 years, right? So even though they're in the North, there's a little sort of lingering prejudice, right? They don't want to use the black troops for anything but manual labor in the back, right? But Burnside says we want to send and they don't even mix white and black, right? The black army troops have to be by themselves so they don't contaminate the white troops or something. But the white troops are exhausted, so Burnside says we're going to use these black troops. And once it's exploded, the black regiment's going to go in. There's going to be a big hole where there's going to be a big crater where the bomb is. So these troops are trained and to go in, go around the crater, right, and then build up a fortification, right, where other troops can come in, right, and funnel into Petersburg. And so the black troops trained. They were very enthusiastic and gung-ho, and they trained for this this particular mission for like weeks, right? They trained for it. They knew exactly what to do. Like first they had to, when they got out of the trenches, they were supposed to get these, because there's trenches all over. So once you get these little bridges set up, so the trip for, so the soldiers wouldn't have to go in and out of their own trenches, right? They could just sail on few, and then they were going to go through around and then set up an embankment, and it was all planned out. And they trained for weeks. But right before the the battle was to take place, Meade says, no, we can't send black troops in. They're not good enough. We're going to send our good old white boys in to sort of go in there and do the first wave, and then the black troops would be the follow up, the support troops, right? But this was like a day before the battle. They hadn't been trained, right? Well, they were veterans, right? They'd been in battles before, but they never trained for this particular battle. So that was the first mistake, right? I mean,
that was probably a racist decision because he didn't want them to have any glory. He thought it might work. So
yeah, I don't know.
So that was the first mistake that Meade made, and he made it like the night of. And then the explosion, they filled the tunnel on both sides. At the end of the tunnel, they went off on two different directions, and they filled it with tons and tons of explosives.
800 tons of TNT, yeah.
And then when it was supposed to go off at 3:00, of course, with their rigged fuse, it went out a couple times, and they had to send somebody in there to relight it, and it was delayed. It didn't go off until later, like 4:30.
Yeah, could you imagine those guys who had to go into that tunnel?
Yeah,
you think there's a lit fuse, and then they had to go in there and find out what splice, and then relight it and get out.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It didn't matter because most of them were going to get massacred anyway. So what the result is at like 4:20 instead of 3:00, it does go off and it blasts the hole. That's an amazing hole. It's 60 feet by 250 feet by 30 feet deep. That's a big crater. That's like a non-nuclear blast from today.
Yeah, they actually, they say it's the biggest explosion before an atomic weapon in Japan. So I mean,
when that happened, these people were just stupefied. They had no idea it was going to be that big. So most of them were just standing around. But then what happened? They all filed through there. They didn't know what they're doing, and they get shot in the crater. Basically, is what happens, right?
Yeah. So the white troops, well, the North, the South, it kills like what 300, 400 of their people right off the bat, and for like half a mile on each side, everybody like scatters, right? So there's like an open path to Petersburg at this point for the first half hour, right? But the troops who are not prepared, and they're not totally untrained for this. This is something they've never seen before. So they come out. First of all, they just stand there for 10 minutes looking at
what happened. What did I just see?
What did I just see? So they're like stunned. And then instead of going around the crater like they're supposed to, they think, well, this can be a good embankment to go in there, and we can use it as a super trench to sort of shoot. But they're going in and they find out it's way too deep, and they're like going in, and then the other troops, like one person goes in, the person behind him follows, and then that's where everybody else is going. So all of these troops are just going down into this crater, right? And there's this one Southern general who's like really bright. He figures it out, right? He goes, they're like going into the crater, right? So he rallies his troops, and they just makes a semicircle around the crater and off to the side, and he says it's just like a turkey shoot because these people are in this loose dirt, and they keep piling in, right? One troop goes in, another troop goes in. They're on top of each other. They're fighting each other, trying to get out, and they can't get up the other side. And the South comes in, surrounds us, and just starts shooting down into this crater. And then Meade or Burnside, instead of like realizing it's a lost cause, right? This is the lost cause for this battle, right? It's over. The battle's over. You're not going to win this thing anymore. You had an opportunity for the first 20 minutes, but after that, the opportunity's gone. They and one of the Southern like sergeants or something heard digging, right, early on. So he started building trenches behind the
Yeah, so they're
first.
shooting at them all the way around the crater, basically.
So, so they're not going to win. They're like, but then Meade says, well, we have the black troops who are raring to go, right? And he sends them in, right? And now there's nowhere for them to go, right?
But still,
Except,
they get like 300 yards at one point
yeah, so
past.
they actually have to go into they're like funneled in. So they're like going into the crater too. They're the only ones who go into the crater and out of the crater and start fighting. They get like 300 feet beyond, but the white troops never get out of the crater, right? And so the black troops are there like looking around by themselves, and the Southern troops do not consider the black troops prisoners of war, right? They're escaped slaves,
So they
right? So
execute
it's
them.
just tragic. So they're like the black troops are there by themselves, surrounded by the second trench that they built up, and then they're slaughtered. The white troops are slaughtered, and finally Meade comes and says, just anybody who can, retreat, and then they close up the gap, and that was the end of the Battle of the Crater. Like what, 4,000 Europe northern troops died, and 1,000 less than 1,000 southern troops died, and most of
It
those in the
was
initial explosion.
it was a
So
bad day for everybody on all sides. But some of the things that, if you could imagine, you always think about what's the worst place ever you'd ever want to be in a battle, and everybody thinks of World War I in the trenches. This was one of those days where because the initial explosion was so intense that it buried people, and it was just like the top of their hands, trying to get out, just completely packed in dirt. And then it's just the carnage. It was crazy. So there was three
yeah,
layers
but
of
yeah,
mismanagement that led
but
to
the thing
that.
is, the idea was correct, right? The
Yeah.
people who thought it up had the right idea, right? The engineering was correct, right? The initial planning of the attack was correct. Everything was correct, right? That it could have been pulled off, and the war could have ended 8 months earlier, right? Literally, except for one stupid decision to replace untrained white folks, to replace the black regiment that had actually been trained for this specific battle. What excuse could you know
Well, I think that
so
over those military blunders are bad, but you learn from them, and hopefully that wouldn't happen again.
yeah.
But I don't know. It
Oh,
was
yeah, and the other stupid thing, this is what Burnside, his mistake was. So when Meade says you have to use white troops for the initial attack, right? And Burnside actually says, no, that's a really bad idea. And Meade goes, well, I'm the boss, right? One of those I'm the boss things, right?
yeah.
And Burnside, well, okay. And then he had three lieutenants who could have led the charge, right? And he says, I don't know I can't think right now. It's like, I'm too pissed, right? So he gets his three lieutenants, and he has them draw straws, right? He
Yeah.
has two really good lieutenants who could have actually been on the battlefield guiding the troops, who would have, who would have been smart enough to tell them, don't go into the friggin' trench. That's suicide. Go around the trench. But no, this is just bad luck, where the one lieutenant they got to lead the battle was an absolute coward drunk.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as the blast goes off, he gets scared, runs away, hides in a bomb shelter, and gets drunk on bourbon, right? So
Right.
these white troops that are going out have absolutely no leadership. So they're
That's
just
what I
going.
said. There's three
That's why
layers.
they're like hanging around the first 10 minutes. They're waiting for their lieutenant to come up and lead the way, and he's in the back getting drunk. So when they finally do go forward, they stumble into the crater and they get killed, and the people and the the black troops going, what the fuck? What's going on? Right? Let us go. Let us go. Let us go. What we're trained to do. So they held these people back until the very end, and then they ended up getting killed too. So
Right.
that
So
was
yeah,
so there's
that's
two
what I
really
was.
bad decisions. One was the replacement of the troops, which wouldn't have been fatal if they replaced it with a lieutenant who knew what who wasn't a coward and a drunk.
Right.
And
That's what
why
I
didn't
said
I
early
know the
on.
guy was a coward and a
Those
drunk? Right?
There was 3 layers of absolute horrible
Stupidity.
decision. There was the racist Meade, there was the sideburn indecision, there was the drunk coward general. So we shouldn't say their names. Don't honor them by saying their freaking names. They cost hundreds of thousands of lives if you think about the length of the war as it extended. So anyway, on a happier note, I guess that we've summed up the Battle of the Crater, and you can read all about it, Wikipedia
Yeah,
to YouTube.
the
So
Great Courses has a really good Civil War series.
yeah, check out Great Courses, www.greatcourses.com. If you like that at all, please remember to hit subscribe, and we'll be back soon. Thanks, guys, for watching. Oh, stop recording.